Okay, so we've got a pretty hefty stack of reports here, all about Alkem Laboratories' latest quarter, press releases, financials, investor presentations. That's sound intimidating, right?
It can be a bit much, yeah.
But that's why we're here. We've gone through it all, and we're going to break it down for you, tell you what really matters so you can understand where Alkem is headed.
Exactly. We'll cut through all the noise and get right to those key insights.
Perfect. So, first off, for anyone who maybe isn't super familiar, Alkem Laboratories is a pretty big deal in the Indian pharmaceutical market.
Oh, yeah.
Huge. Like the fifth largest, I think. And they've been around forever, like 50 years.
Yeah.
They're really well known for certain areas like anti-infectives and gastrointestinal medications.
Right. And pain management, too.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
true. But what I find really interesting is that they're making a real push into chronic therapies like diabetes and cardiology.
Yeah, like they're thinking, okay, India's population is aging. We got to be prepared for that.
Exactly. So smart, right?
Totally. And they're not content with just staying in India either. They've got a global footprint now
Oh, yeah, true.
with 19 manufacturing facilities and R&D centers. And some of those are even in the US.
Wow. Okay, so they're serious.
They're definitely aiming for a piece of that global pharma pie.
Okay, well, let's get into the numbers then. For the first half of fiscal year 25, their total revenue went up just a bit by 0.6%.
Year over year, right?
Yep, reaching at 64,465 million. Not a huge jump, but still growth is growth.
True, true. But here's where it gets kind of interesting. Their revenue might have grown modestly, but Alkem really focused on squeezing more profit out of every single sale.
Ah, so it's all about efficiency.
Exactly. Their EBITDA margin, so basically how much profit they make on each dollar of revenue, jumped up to 21.1% for the first half of the year, which is up from 17.7% the year before.
Pretty significant.
Oh, yeah. And in Q2 specifically, they managed a healthy 22% margin.
Nice. So they're not just chasing bigger revenue numbers, they're actually becoming more efficient and profitable.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really smart strategy in such a competitive market.
Yeah, how is that even possible?
It's definitely a sign of really good management. They're being super strategic about their product mix, focusing on products with higher profit margins,
Makes sense.
and they're keeping a close eye on costs, making sure everything is running smoothly.
Right, like getting rid of inefficiencies.
Totally. They're playing the long game here,
Sure.
aiming for sustainable financial health, not just a quick buck.
Smart. Okay, now let's zoom in on their main market, India.
Their bread and butter.
Exactly. They're a powerhouse there. In fact, their domestic sales made up a whopping 70.4% of their total revenue in the first half of fiscal year 25.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
I know. And
Wow.
get this, in Q2, that number jumped even higher to 72.8%.
Wow. Talk about home field advantage.
I know, right?
They're not just riding the wave of the growing Indian pharmaceutical market, IPM, either. They're actually outperforming it in a lot of key areas.
Interesting. Like what?
Well, take their Pan brand, for example.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one at the pharmacy.
You probably have. It's actually climbed to the #2 spot in the entire IPM. Yep. That's some serious brand recognition.
Okay, so they're killing it in India.
They really are.
And what about their volume growth? That impressed me too.
Oh, yeah, that was amazing. The overall market volume in India has been pretty flat.
If not declining, I think.
Right. But Alkem's has actually increased. So they're not just jacking up prices to boost revenue. They're actually selling more products.
Which means people really want their product.
Exactly. They're really good at capturing market share.
Okay, so home turf is looking good for them. But what about abroad?
Things get a little more complicated when we look internationally, especially in the U.S.
Why? What's going on there?
Well, while India's booming, their U.S. operations are facing some headwinds. U.S. sales actually dropped by 15.3% year over year for the first half of fiscal year 25.
Ouch.
And it was even steeper in Q2, a 22.1% drop.
Oof. That's gotta hurt.
It does seem like a bit of a setback, especially when you consider that they actually received a bunch of U.S. FDA approvals and even launched new products in the U.S. market during this same period.
So they're actively trying to grow in the U.S.
Right. So what gives? It makes you wonder, are they spreading themselves too thin?
Yeah.
Or is this just like a temporary thing?
Yeah, it's a head scratcher for sure. It could be a whole bunch of different factors. Maybe competition from generic brands is increasing, or there's pricing pressure from insurance companies.
That's hard to say.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle these challenges going forward.
For sure.
But you know what's encouraging? They haven't let these challenges stop them from investing in their future.
You're talking about their R&D spending, right?
Exactly. They actually increased it to 4.2% of revenue in the first half of the year compared to 3.7% last year. And in Q2, it hit 4.3%, which is up from 3.4% the year before.
That's great. They're not letting short-term problems derail their long-term vision.
Nope.
They're really committed to innovation, developing new products and therapies, staying ahead of the game.
It's like they're saying, hey, the US market is tough, but we're not giving up. We're here to stay.
Right. They're in it for the long haul.
I like that attitude. Okay, now let's switch gears for a sec and talk about their financial stability. Because ultimately, that's what allows them to do all of this, to take risks and make big moves.
Right. You need a solid foundation.
Well, as of September 30th, 2024, they had a net cash position of $42.2 billion.
Wow.
That's a pretty good cushion, wouldn't you say?
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That kind of cash position gives them so much flexibility.
Right, like to invest in R&D or even pursue acquisitions.
Wholly. And it also means they can weather any storms that might come their way.
Exactly.
They're not just surviving, they're thriving.
And they're not being greedy with all that cash either. They announced a final dividend of $5 billion per share for the fiscal year. They're sharing their success with investors.
That's a great sign. They're finding that sweet spot between investing for growth and rewarding their shareholders.
It's a balancing act that a lot of companies struggle with.
It really is.
But Alkem seems to have figured it out, at least for now.
So far, so good.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Their overall performance, their amazing position in India, those head-scratching challenges in the US, their commitment to R&D and innovation. But there's one thing that really stood out to me when I was going through all their reports. Their success with the anti-diabetic segment in India.
Interesting.
Their growth there has been insane, like way faster than the overall market.
That is a sharp observation. And it's
Right.
not just some random fluke. It's a very deliberate, strategic move that shows just how well they understand the Indian market.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's unpack that. Why is this focus on diabetes so important? What does it tell us about Alkem's long-term strategy?
Well, think about it. India has a huge population, right? And it's
Yeah.
growing all the time. So they're facing this kind of like rising tide of chronic diseases.
Right,
And diabetes is like right at the forefront of that.
makes sense.
So by really focusing on this segment, Alkem is putting themselves in a perfect position to address this critical need and tap into a massive market.
It's like they're anticipating the future of healthcare in India.
Exactly. It's a brilliant move.
And didn't we say that chronic therapies tend to have higher profit margins than medications for acute illnesses?
You're absolutely right. Treating chronic conditions is a long game, both for the patient and the pharmaceutical company.
Right, because they need medication for a long time.
For years, potentially.
So by focusing on diabetes, they're not just doing good for the world, they're setting themselves up for sustainable profit, too.
It's a smart move, for sure.
It seems like they're thinking several steps ahead. They're meeting a growing need, securing long-term revenue, and appealing to investors who want to put their money in companies that are both profitable and socially responsible.
That's a great way to put it. A win-win-win scenario.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit and go back to that puzzle about their performance in the U.S. market. We know their sales are down, even though they have new product launches and FDA approvals.
Yeah, it's a weird one.
It's like they're swimming upstream.
Right. It's like, what's going on?
What could be causing this disconnect? Is the U.S. market just super tough?
Well, their investor presentation gives us a few clues. They're actually focusing on some pretty niche segments in the U.S., like complex generics.
Okay, so instead of trying to compete with the big generic drug companies on like everyday medications, they're targeting specialized areas where maybe there's less competition and they can charge higher prices.
Exactly. It's like they're finding these little pockets of opportunity where they can be the dominant player.
Like that saying, don't try to be everything to everyone.
Exactly.
It seems like they're being really smart about focusing their energy and resources on areas where they can really excel.
Right. They're playing to their strengths.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's another big thing we haven't talked about yet, sustainability.
Ah, yes, the big ESG.
Yeah, because it's not just about profits anymore, right? Investors and consumers are paying a lot more attention now to how companies are addressing environmental, social, and governance issues.
Absolutely. Sustainability isn't just a nice bonus anymore. It's a must-have for any company that wants to stay competitive.
So where does Alkem stand on all this? Did their reports talk about sustainability?
Well, they didn't go into detail about specific initiatives in their investor presentation, but they did emphasize their strong corporate governance practices and their commitment to ethical conduct.
Which is a good starting point for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Those are like the foundations of any sustainability strategy.
But yeah, it would be great to see them give more detail in future reports.
Totally. Transparency is key, especially when it comes to ESG. People want to see concrete actions, not just vague promises.
Agreed. Okay, so zooming out for a minute and thinking about everything we've discussed, what's the big takeaway here? What's Alchem's overall approach?
I think it's pretty clear that they're playing a very strategic and calculated game. They're not just reacting to the market, they're anticipating it and planning ahead.
I like that.
And they're not afraid to make difficult decisions either.
Right, like when they decided to divest that plant in St. Louis.
Exactly. Even though it meant taking a hit financially.
Yeah, they had to report an impairment loss of 576.6 million on their standalone and consolidated statements because of that.
Right.
But it shows they're serious about streamlining their operations and focusing on the areas where they have a competitive edge.
They're pruning the branches to let the tree grow stronger.
I like that analogy. And speaking of financials, their cash flow statement has some interesting things to tell us too.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, it highlights how much they're investing in fixed deposits,
Interesting.
which to me suggests they're being quite conservative with their finances.
That makes sense, especially because they're also paying out a dividend, right?
Right. They got to balance rewarding their shareholders with being smart about their money.
It's that balancing act again.
It all comes back to balance, investing for growth while also ensuring profitability and keeping investors happy.
It's a tough job. Okay, so
Right.
up to now, we've mostly been talking about their consolidated performance, which combines the results of Alkem and all its subsidiaries.
Right.
But their statements actually break down their standalone performance, too.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
So if anyone really wants to go deep, they can look at those standalone statements to get a better understanding of the core business itself without the influence of the subsidiaries.
It's like peeling back another layer.
Right. Getting to the heart of it all.
Okay, so we've covered their financials, their strategic initiatives, and how they're doing in their key markets. What are the big takeaways here? What should our listeners pay attention to?
Well, first off, I think it's clear that Alkem is a company that's moving forward. They're dominant in India, and they're making big moves to stay ahead of the game.
And while they're facing some challenges in the US, it doesn't seem like they're giving up on the global stage anytime soon.
Yeah, they're not backing down.
And their commitment to R&D and their focus on niche segments definitely makes me think they're in it for the long haul.
I agree. What impresses me most is their laser focus on profitability.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They're not just chasing higher revenue, they're optimizing everything to be as profitable as possible.
Right, like they're super efficient.
Totally. They're making really smart choices about which products to focus on. They're all about high-margin areas, and they're really good at controlling costs.
That makes sense.
All of this points to them building a really sustainable business model that will create value over the long term.
And don't forget about their strong cash position and those consistent dividends. That's really appealing to investors.
Yeah, it shows that they care about sharing their success and rewarding the people who believe in their vision.
So the big question is, what does the future hold for Alkem? Can they overcome the challenges they're facing in the US? And can they stay on top in India as competition gets tougher?
Those are the million-dollar questions. Only time will tell.
Right.
But from what we've seen so far, I think they're well-positioned to handle the challenges that come their way in this ever-changing pharmaceutical world.
They seem to be prepared.
Yeah, their commitment to R&D, that strategic focus on high-growth areas, and their really disciplined way of managing their finances, I think they have all the right pieces in place to keep succeeding.
And we can't forget about how much their volume grew in the Indian market, even when the market overall was basically flat.
Oh yeah, that's huge. It's really remarkable.
I know. It really says a lot about the strength of their brand, how good they are at marketing and connecting with consumers.
It shows just how well they understand the Indian market and how effective they are at executing their strategies.
It's like they've figured out the secret to success in India.
They really have. So the question now is, can they take that same formula and apply it globally? That's the challenge and the opportunity that lies ahead for them.
So we talked about Alkem's volume growth in India being really impressive, especially since the overall market wasn't exactly booming. How are they doing that? What's their secret?
Well, one big factor is definitely their brand strength.
Yeah.
They've built this portfolio of really well-known brands that people trust,
Makes sense.
both consumers and healthcare professionals.
Right.
Their Pan brand hitting #2 in the entire Indian pharmaceutical market. That's a perfect example.
That kind of brand recognition, though, it doesn't just happen overnight, right? That takes years of effort.
Oh, absolutely.
Like delivering consistent quality, smart marketing, and building those relationships with doctors and pharmacists.
It's a long game for sure.
Yeah, it's not just about having a catchy name or a flashy advertisement.
No way.
You got to actually deliver on your promises and build that trust with the people who really matter. The patients and the healthcare providers who are prescribing your medications.
Exactly.
So it sounds like they have a pretty solid strategy going on here,
Oh, yeah.
combining that brand power with a deep understanding of how the Indian healthcare system works.
Absolutely. And let's not forget their focus on keeping things affordable, too.
Oh, right. Affordability is huge.
Yeah. They're really committed to providing access to good quality medications at prices that people can actually afford.
Which is super important in India.
Oh, especially in a market like India, where people are often paying for healthcare out of pocket. So by catering to those price-sensitive consumers, they're opening up a whole new market for themselves.
Smart. And it fits in perfectly with their whole mission of inspiring healthier lives.
Right. It's not just about making money for them.
It's about making a difference.
Exactly. It's a strategy that's both ethical and commercially smart.
Yeah, people want to support companies that share their values.
Absolutely.
And Alkem's showing that they're not just in it for the profit.
For sure. So you put all that together, the strong brands, the good marketing, that commitment to affordability, and this whole purpose-driven approach, it's no wonder they're seeing such incredible volume growth.
They've cracked the code, it seems like.
They've connected all the dots.
Exactly. Okay, so to wrap things up here, when we look at Alkem Laboratories, what's the big takeaway?
Well, they're not just playing checkers, they're playing chess.
I like that.
They're always a few steps ahead, anticipating what's going to happen in the market and making strategic moves to make sure they come out on top.
So they're playing the long game?
For sure. Yeah. So the big question now is, can they take this winning formula that's worked so well for them in India and replicate it globally?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, they've clearly figured out the Indian market.
They have.
But the international market, especially the U.S., is a whole other beast.
It's a tough one.
Can they adapt? Can they compete with the giants in the industry?
It's definitely a challenge.
For sure.
But based on everything we've seen today, their track record, how strong they are financially, their commitment to innovation, I wouldn't count them out just yet.
Me neither.
They've proven time and time again that they're adaptable, they're not afraid to make tough choices, and they're willing to evolve.
So to our listener, if you're looking for a company that's doing good in the world, making a real difference, but also delivering for its investors,
Alkem is one to watch.
yeah, keep an eye on them. Their journey is definitely far from over, and it'll be really interesting to see what they do next.
Absolutely. They have a bright future ahead of them, and we'll be following their story closely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you learned something new.
Always remember, knowledge is power.
The more you know, the better decisions you can make.
No matter who you are.
Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.